What if the man who saved the United States had to watch his country tear itself apart before he could save it? In 1861, Abraham Lincoln became president of a nation on the edge of collapse. 7 southern states had already left the Union. An enemy government had been created. And before Lincoln could even begin his presidency, America was heading toward the bloodiest conflict in its history. But Lincoln was not a military hero. He was not born into wealth. He had no powerful political family behind him. He was a self-educated lawyer from Illinois who had grown up in a simple frontier environment. And somehow, this unlikely man would become the president responsible for holding the United States together. But his story began long before the White House. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in Kentucky. His childhood was shaped by frontier life, hard labor, and limited formal education. Lincoln did not attend school for years like many privileged children of his time. Instead, he taught himself. He read whatever books he could find. He studied by the light of candles and fires after long days of physical work. Little by little, the young Lincoln developed something that would later become one of his greatest weapons: his ability to communicate. He learned how to take complicated ideas and explain them in simple language. And eventually, that skill would take him into politics. Lincoln moved to Illinois and became a lawyer. He entered politics and served in the Illinois legislature. Later, he served in the U.S. House of Representatives. But Lincoln's political career was not always successful. He lost elections. He experienced setbacks, and for years, he remained far from the center of American power. Then America became consumed by one question: could slavery continue to expand into the nation's western territories? Lincoln opposed the expansion of slavery, but his political position was complicated by the crisis surrounding. In 1858, during his famous debates with Stephen Douglas, Lincoln warned that the country could not remain permanently divided over slavery. His words made him nationally known. 2 years later, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. And almost immediately, the nation began to break apart. Southern states began seceding from the Union. By the time Lincoln took the presidential oath on March 4, 1861, the crisis had become almost impossible to stop. In his first inaugural address, Lincoln appealed for peace. He warned that there should be no war unless the country itself forced it upon him. But the conflict was already moving toward him. Then came the moment that changed everything: Fort Sumter. In April 1861, Confederate forces attacked the U.S. fort in Charleston Harbor. The Civil War had begun. Lincoln called for troops. The Union prepared for war. And suddenly, the self-taught lawyer from Illinois was responsible for leading a country through an enormous national catastrophe. But Lincoln soon discovered that saving the Union would be far harder than winning an election. The first years of the war went badly for the North. Union armies suffered defeats. Generals were criticized. Casualties continued to rise. And Lincoln faced pressure from almost every direction. Some people wanted him to fight harder. Others wanted him to negotiate. And millions of Americans were wondering whether the United States could survive at all. But Lincoln had begun to understand something. This war was no longer only about keeping the country together. It was becoming a battle over freedom itself. Lincoln's transformation was about to change American history. At the beginning of the Civil War, Lincoln's primary goal was preserving the Union. But slavery was at the center of the conflict. The Confederacy depended heavily on enslaved labor, and as the war continued, Lincoln increasingly saw emancipation as both a moral and military necessity. Then came Antietam. In September 1862, Union and Confederate forces clashed at Antietam in Maryland. The battle was extraordinarily bloody. But it gave Lincoln the opportunity he had been waiting for. 5 days after the battle, Lincoln announced his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. And on January 1, 1863, the final proclamation took effect. It declared enslaved people in the rebellious states to be free. The proclamation did not immediately end slavery everywhere. It was a wartime measure applying to areas in rebellion, and its implementation depended on Union military victory. But it fundamentally changed the meaning of the war. The United States was no longer fighting only to preserve the Union. Freedom had become central to the cause. And Lincoln was becoming a very different kind of president. But while Lincoln was fighting for the future of the country, he was also experiencing terrible personal loss. In 1862, his young son Willie died while the family was living in the White House. The president who was carrying the weight of a national war was also carrying grief inside his own home. And outside the White House, the death toll continued to rise. Then came Gettysburg. In July 1863, Union and Confederate armies fought one of the most important battles of the Civil War. For 3 days, thousands of soldiers fought across the Pennsylvania countryside. The Union won, but victory came at an enormous cost. Months later, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg for the dedication of a new national cemetery. He was not even the main speaker. Edward Everett, a famous orator, spoke for more than 2 hours. Then Lincoln stood before the crowd. His speech lasted only about 2 minutes. But those few minutes became one of the most famous moments in American history. Lincoln did not simply talk about the battle. He talked about the meaning of America. He connected the war to the nation's founding promise of liberty and equality. And he called for a new birth of freedom. The Gettysburg Address transformed the meaning of the war. Lincoln was telling Americans that the survival of the Union was connected to the ideals on which the nation had been founded. But winning the war was still far away. The fighting continued. Lincoln faced political opposition. He faced criticism over military decisions. And in 1864, he faced another enormous challenge: re-election. Many Americans believed Lincoln might lose. The war had dragged on for years. Casualties were staggering. The country was exhausted. But then the military situation began to change. Union victories strengthened Lincoln's position. And in November 1864, Americans re-elected him. Lincoln had won another term. But the war still had to end. In 1865, Union forces continued pushing the Confederacy toward collapse. And finally, in April, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses South Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The surrender did not instantly end every conflict, but it marked a decisive moment in the collapse of the Confederacy. After 4 years of war, the Union had survived. Lincoln had achieved what he had fought for. But now he faced the hardest question of all. What would happen next? How would America rebuild? And how would a wounded nation become one country again? Lincoln's answer was not revenge. In his second inaugural address, delivered in March 1865, he spoke about the war with a remarkable sense of restraint. He did not celebrate victory as an excuse for hatred. Instead, he looked toward reconciliation. The country needed to heal. The former Confederate states would have to return to the Union. And millions of formerly enslaved people were beginning a completely different chapter of American history. Lincoln supported a process of reconstruction that would reunite the nation. But he would not live long enough to see that work completed. On April 11, 1865, just days after Lee's surrender, Lincoln gave a speech about Reconstruction. He discussed the future of the former Confederate states. He also spoke about voting rights for some black men. One person listening to the speech was furious. His name was John Wilkes Booth. Booth was a well-known actor and a Confederate sympathizer. He had become increasingly hostile toward Lincoln. 2 days later, on April 14, 1865, Lincoln went to Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., with his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. That night, the president was attacked. Lincoln was taken across the street to a boarding house. Doctors worked through the night, but he never regained consciousness. On the morning of April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln died. He was 56 years old. The man who had spent 4 years fighting to preserve the United States was gone just as the country entered its uncertain post-war future. The assassination shocked the nation. Lincoln's death transformed him from a wartime president into one of the most enduring figures in American history. But what exactly made Lincoln so important? Was it the Emancipation Proclamation? Was it the Gettysburg Address? Was it his leadership during the Civil War? Or was it something deeper? Lincoln understood that America was more than a collection of states. He believed the Union represented an experiment in self-government. A nation founded on the idea that government should ultimately belong to its people. And during the Civil War, he fought to preserve that experiment. But Lincoln's legacy is also complicated. He was a man of his time, and his views evolved throughout his political career. His presidency must be understood within the enormous political, military, racial, and moral conflicts of the 19th century. The Emancipation Proclamation was not the same thing as the complete abolition of slavery. That came through the 13th Amendment, which was ratified after Lincoln's death. But Lincoln's presidency helped push the United States toward that transformation. And his words at Gettysburg gave Americans a language for understanding their national purpose. Today, Lincoln's name appears on monuments, streets, schools, books, currency, and memorials across the United States. But perhaps his greatest legacy is not a statue. It is a question. Can a nation survive when its people are deeply divided? Lincoln's presidency suggests that preserving a democracy requires more than winning elections. It requires leadership during moments when compromise becomes difficult, fear becomes powerful, and the future is uncertain. Abraham Lincoln began life in a log cabin. He had little formal education. He failed in business. He lost elections. He faced depression and personal tragedy. Yet he eventually became President of the United States during the greatest crisis the young nation had ever faced. And when the country was falling apart, he refused to give up on the idea that it could remain one nation. So now I want to ask you something. Was Abraham Lincoln America's greatest president because he saved the Union? Or because he helped redefine what freedom and equality could mean for the nation? Tell us your answer in the comments. And if you believe America's history is more than the stories we learn in school, make sure you like this video and subscribe to The Hidden Chapter. Because behind every famous name, there is another story. And sometimes, the most important chapter is the one history almost forgot. This is The Hidden Chapter. And there is always more to the story.